Yeah, I know. Congratulations. It is in order.
Should I like pan over the?
Yeah.
Okay, we're ready.
All right. My topic was obsessive compulsive disorder, or OCD, as many of you want to call it. As far as identifying the problem, just a basic definition of is a mental disorder characterized by intrusive thoughts that produce anxiety, by repetitious or repetitive behaviors aimed at reducing anxiety, or by combinations of such thoughts, which are obsessions, and then the behaviors are the compulsions. So many times people get that confused. They assume that obsessions and compulsions they're interchangeable. Obsessions are intrusive thoughts where you think about it over and over and over again, and the compulsions are actually acting upon those thoughts. It generally develops in early adolescence between the ages of 10 and 15. So, this is the age group that we're going to be dealing with as middle schoolers. And it severely impacts their everyday life, including school, work, and how they interact with others. All right, the research section is what I revised, but I've got a little note, so always ready to talk about it. Prevalence. Originally, the research said that there was only 1% of students that have bipolar or obsessive compulsive disorder in the schools. And this is with the early research. But it's coming to find out that it's actually grown to 4% of students, which is still a small number, but it's something that you're going to have to interact with. One of the biggest things that they talked about is how OCD is really hard to diagnose because you're dealing with an early age where their emotions are going to be changing up and down, so they can't really pinpoint is what they're doing an actual obsession or compulsion, or is it just how they grow and change as these adolescents. Also, the OCD can change within the student over time, as the research said, that it can focus on their emotions and how they change. So that's why it's kind of hard to diagnose, and that's why it's becoming more prevalent, because they're taking a wider variety of students and looking at their behaviors. Also, multiple issues. One of the biggest things that it said is that if a student experiences OCD, they're more likely to experience anxiety or alcohol abuse, drug abuse, or they could also develop an eating disorder. So OCD generally leads to something else. There's a clip that I'm going to show you here in a second that it also led to depression within the certain individual. All right. As far as the research also says that about 4 out of the 5 sources, like journal-wise, that talked about treatment, they said that cognitive behavioral approach was the best, and that what they did was, it's called ERP, or exposure response prevention. So what they would do is that they would expose the person that has OCD with what triggers it. So the girl in the example that we're getting ready to show, she feels that the other people around her are contaminated.
Wow.
She can't go to the school. She has to, or the kids at school, she has trouble walking into the school. She has trouble going to the stores that she knows kids in her class have been. They're contaminated. She'll drive an hour and a half to go to stores that these kids have not been into. Another example is, so you see where from me and Dr. Pearson are standing? That's how far she has to have her mother away from her. And that's her mom. If her mom, because she's sitting on the edge of the couch, and she cannot move from the couch, and then the mom is sitting on a chair over there. If the mom were to get up and get to where about me and Mike are, she'll freak out. She cannot have her, and that's her mother. That's someone that, raised her, is with her, but she is so contaminated that she cannot have her in there. She literally, she freaked out. So what these prevention does is that it slowly, over a period of time, exposes them to the things that they're obsessed with, or the compulsions that they do, and try to lessen the experience, because if you repeatedly experience this, their thoughts are that your mind, it'll lessen. It doesn't always work, but it takes long periods of time. And a lot of people want to say that, you know, with the anxiety disorders, because that's what OCD is. It's one of the anxiety disorders. It goes under, you know, that it's easier to give them medicine. You know, to give them, you know, a prescription medicine that will, like an antidepressant that will calm them down. But all the research said if you give them medication alone, it will not solve the problem. Mm-hmm. So you have to give them the therapy, and then you can add on the medication. But if you add it together, that's what works best. But they would prefer, especially at a young age, to start them with the therapy first, and then transition into the medication later. Because if they have OCD, they're probably going to have it the rest of their life. Mm-hmm. So it's, you know, you don't want them to get so dependent on these drugs per se. And that's just how the research said it, and it draws off of my own personal opinion. You know, really feel that we probably shouldn't be medicating our youth. Mm-hmm. But, you know, that's, like I said, my own personal opinion. Okay? Show you. Here's the one. So what do I do if you're supposed to upload it? Just don't do it?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, this is the same thing we had to do the other night. They should just do this, make it permanent.
I already have this stuff on the machine. It makes no sense. It's 5 o'clock, we still gotta do this all day long.
Hey, I'm gonna reach that 15 minutes though, right?
I think not. You like precedent.
I'm trying.
Hasn't been able to get inside her school for 4 months. Her mother, Diane, was there as a teacher and worked full-time helping Michelle with her OCD.
When she was done with school, she would cry for an hour and a half every night, saying how difficult it was to go to school, but I couldn't touch her.
Michelle's fear is of other students, that some of them are somehow contaminated. She can't go to school or anywhere in public where she has seen other students.
We had to go like hours away just to go get like a pair of pants or get cleaning supplies to wash the washer, because everything around here was contaminated, all the stores were, because the kids from school had been there.
It is a crippling fear that has left her isolated at home. Her laundry has to be done separately from the rest of the family, and one laundry cycle often isn't enough to convince Michelle her clothes are clean. Even the washer has to be washed. She showers incessantly at home, blistering hot water. At one point, her parents couldn't even get her out of the shower, not even when there was a brand new puppy in the home.
We were gonna go get him puppy toys and take him to the store, and she was so excited that whole day. And after an hour in the shower, I'm like, well, you need to leave if you want to go, and she couldn't do it. And I shut the water off, I pulled her out of the shower, and she, don't touch me, and kept going like this, and just sat in the cooler, rocked, and cried.
Her OCD, the fear of being dirty, took over her life, plunging her into depression.
I became suicidal because I couldn't touch anything. And when you can't really touch anything, you can't do anything. You can't enjoy anything. So, there wasn't really a point in living anymore.
A far different portrait from the little girl who was once a straight-A student, a dancer who loved dressing up, a child who once proudly displayed her smile. Your school situation will be...
So that's that, and then I just wanted to show you, since I mentioned that and I got a response. It's really short.
Inside this suburban office building in New Jersey, a small yellow room where a battle is about to play out right in front of our camera.
Hello!
15-year-old Bridget Newcomb looks like your typical teenager on the outside, but inside she is wrestling to break free from unimaginable fear. And on this day, her progress is measured in inches.
What do you think?
It was 9.
Well, come on. Look at that.
Her therapist is measuring the counts for Bridget.
All right.
Every inch counts.
You could lean against the
Arm.
armrest with your arm.
From her elbow to her hand is good for you, okay? Why don't you?
The woman at the other end of the sofa is about to move from her chair to the couch.
Tell me what's going on.
She got so close to the sofa floor.
That woman who has Bridget so terrified is her own mother. Bridget believes her mother is somehow contaminated, and Bridget's fear is that her mother will contaminate her too.
So if someone has that intense effect, you know, and they're your own mother, this is definitely gonna play an impact for teachers. So it has one of the biggest reasons why this has an impact as teachers is because I said that the prevalence has grown from 1 to 4%. So it has a growing number of awareness. So the more research that there are for young adults, it generates more awareness for the teachers and for the parents, and so then that way their students are actually being understood. Because before, they were just that weird kid that washes their hands 10 times. I don't know why they do it, but they do. And then with this awareness, it attaches meaning to the student, and it kind of gives them, they do this because they have to. And then it's not your job as the teacher to be the therapist, but you know, you kind of know a little bit about the background. Another reason why this is important for teachers, because if it is severe, like if they are diagnosed with OCD, they have an option for a 504 plan. And depending on how debilitating it is, it could also lead to special education. But the majority of the students that do have OCD are placed in the general education classroom, which is the majority of us as teachers want to teach the general education classroom. So we're going to probably experience having a student with OCD. And what we need to know is how to handle that child or how to understand where they're coming from. So this calls for more preparation on the teacher's part to know their students, understanding the disorder, and knowing specific situational treatments. I don't know if has anyone ever experienced someone that has OCD, like known someone?
Oh, really?
And how,
My manager at work.
and you know, a lot of times when we think about it, my example at the beginning is just, we might think of OCD as just a routine, you know, that I like to do this when I get up in the morning. You know, I go to the bathroom, I shower, you know, I listen to music, brush my teeth. I have to do it all in this order. But sometimes with these students, they might get angry if their order is disrupted. Like, I've experienced this. If it goes out of their way, it can turn violent very, very fast. It just depends on how emotionally connected they are to their obsessions or their compulsions. You know, there are different severities of it. So you need to know why someone reacts the way that they do. So if you know your student on a personal level, connecting with them is better for their special needs. How this applies to my classroom is it could possibly be an advisory unit, you know, as awareness, you know, say that there is a student in the classroom that has OCD, and like I said, it has that negative connotation of just some kid that washes his hands 10 times, or he likes to fiddle with the doorknob before he leaves. Those are just things that they're stress relievers. So that could be an advisory unit, so then the student that has OCD could be more understood and the students could see where they're coming from. Also personal attention, it caters to the individual student needs. If there's more research and more awareness, that's definitely going to play a part in my classroom, because if they're showing me that this is something that is going to affect teachers, then it's going to affect me as a general education classroom teacher. I also have a personal connection with the situation. For example, my mom, has anybody ever been to Walmart? Obviously, right? You know how they have the grocery section on one side, they have the you know, the just general merchandise on the other side, which is like shampoo, all that other stuff. When my mom goes into Walmart, she has to go in and go start at the shampoo aisle and go all the way around and make a square all the way around the entire store. If she starts at one place, she will have to go back and go all the way around. I've grown up with a review, which is bed made, floor picked up, room picked up, all dirty clothes out of the bed, bathroom, your alarm set. These are all things that's just half of the review, that I've grown up with, and that I think that some of those things that within OCD, that it has something to do with your own personal home life for the students, because some of them have grown up where they have certain routines that they have to follow, and that it has a family connection with it. So, you know, this is about juvenile OCD, and I think that most of the people that have OCD, which, for example, like my mother, it started at a young age, and that they don't realize it, that it's actually occurring at an early age, because that's just the way they do it. They don't understand. So with this more awareness, like I said, it plays into it, and it helps me understand my mom. And like for my research, my brother-in-law actually, he started getting the symptoms at 10. And it was also, it came from a divorce. So that's why I think that it kind of definitely clearly had a connection with what Claire was talking about. So stressful situations are definite triggers, and all of us have small traces of like habits. I don't know if anyone knows that routines make people feel better. They make them feel like they have more control over their lives. So this is why I think that it's important for my classroom, because we all have a certain way of doing things. Now it's not full-blown OCD, but it's just the way, the lifestyle that we live. And then just my references. So there you go.
Okay, kind of a 30-second summary of why I chose this topic is both me and my fiance have disabilities, and so I kind of became interested in special education that way. But my fiance's experiences are a little bit unique. He was in 6th grade when his parents decided to divorce, and he was misdiagnosed with ADHD at that same point. And so for about a year and a half, he struggled with getting the Ritalin dosage right, not being able to sleep, appetite, things like that, until they finally diagnosed him with Asperger's syndrome. And so going through his parents' divorce kind of worsened it, but obviously divorce can't cause Asperger's syndrome. It's more of a psychological thing that is ingrained in you, which I'll talk about in a little bit. But Asperger's is mainly an autism spectrum disorder that results in social awkwardness for the people who have it. It's a very mild form of autism. So just some broad characteristics that I'm going to cover are that they have difficult social interactions. They have the inability to recognize any nonverbal cues. They often have one broad specific interest area that they like to talk about, and they often appear egocentric and uncaring because they have trouble expressing their emotions in social situations. Causes, it's been linked to mainly 3 different types of causes. Genetics, boys are more likely to get it than girls. It's often passed down from father to son in some sort of gene. There's also labor and neonatal problems if the infant has a brain infection, because it results from the brain. If the infant or the unborn child has a brain infection, that could lead to the development of Asperger's syndrome. And they also have unfavorable genetic events as a cause, so any gene mutations or genes missing in the DNA could cause the development of Asperger's syndrome. They have several challenges in their life, and so I just categorized them as I saw fit, and I'm going to go through and talk about each category one-on-one. They have difficulty expressing verbal and nonverbal communication and interpreting verbal and nonverbal communication. So if you say, I'm very angry with you, that's very obvious to us what that means, but to the child with Asperger's, they're like, what does she mean by that? I don't know. Conversational situations are difficult with them because them and their peers are on the same level. There's no one that's clearly superior or inferior to them. And so for a peer-to-peer interaction, it's hard for them to interpret how you should interact with that type of person. Emotionally charged situations, their emotions are high enough already and they can't come up with the words that they want to express themselves because they have that language disorder. And they're often very, very intellectual. They often have very large vocabularies, but they can't come up with the words and put them together in a sentence that makes sense. And so they're very intelligent, they just can't show that intelligence all the time. Physical challenges, they're uncoordinated. We all know middle school students are uncoordinated to begin with. But because their development is a little bit slower intellectually, as far as understanding their body goes, they're going to be a little bit more uncoordinated than the normal student. hormonal changes. Those with Asperger's syndrome will often display their syndrome a lot more often when they're going through hormonal changes, because all these things are going on with their body and they're frustrated and they have no idea what's going on. They're going through changes and they take out that anger and frustration through their Asperger's syndrome. And so it'll often display itself a lot more during the middle school years when they're going through hormonal changes. They have delayed emotional changes. Some people with Asperger's syndrome have been shown to display adolescent emotions into their mid-20s. And so you could be dealing with a very emotionally and undeveloped child in your class if they have Asperger's. Social challenges, they're unable to interpret facial expressions and voice inflections. If you frown, they're not going to know that that means you're sad. If you're yelling, they're not going to know that that means you're upset. You're going to have to be very clear about your emotions. Don't use sarcasm. You should never use sarcasm in the classroom to begin with. But they're not going to understand that sarcasm at all. They're going to take it literally, and it's going to either affect them negatively or positively, usually negatively. They often seek to develop roles for certain social interactions. And this just comes from the fact that they're unable to interpret social situations for themselves. And so when they see that a lot of their friends have been dating one girl for an average of 2 years, they're going to assume that they should date one girl for an average of 2 years. They make a list, they do all these scientific calculations and these scientific figures and math calculations to make sense of social situations that they can't make sense out of. They have one specific interest area. It can be anything from the atmosphere to dinosaurs. I know when my fiance was younger, he wanted to be a paleontologist. He knew everything there was to be about dinosaurs, and now he's in the health field.
Mm-hmm.
So they can change from year to year, just like our interests change. But one thing that's unique about the child with Asperger's is that they have an overwhelming desire to share their knowledge. And coupled with their inability to interpret social cues, it'll often lead to a long, rambling conversation about their specific interest area when they can't sense that the other person is bored or annoyed or that is inappropriate for the conversation. So that's something that you'll have to deal with in your classroom is someone with Asperger's sharing something that seems irrelevant and they won't stop talking. So got to get them back on track. Transition challenges. We kind of talked a little bit about transitions from the elementary to the middle school. And so I found an article that talked about transitions for Asperger's students. And transitions are difficult for any child to begin with, but for the Asperger's there's a higher level of anxiety. And so these are just some of the things that could cause anxiety. Lockers, they have to keep their stuff organized. And those with Asperger's can't keep their stuff organized. They don't have the organization skills. And so that's just a sense of anxiety. A larger school, they're going to have to be able to find their way around the school, find the cafeteria, the bathrooms, the gym, the nurse's office, everything like that. And the Asperger's child does not like change. And so, I mean, there's anxiety trying to find your way around a new school to begin with, but with the Asperger's child, because of their syndrome, it's magnified 100%. New teachers are hard to get used to as well. Most people look forward to new teachers and new classes, but the Asperger child would rather stay with the same teacher from kindergarten through senior year. They don't like change. They like knowing what that teacher expects of them and being able to look forward to that expectation every day. Homework assignments. Increased homework assignments are hard on them for a reason I'll talk about in a minute. Interacting with students, again, that peer-to-peer interaction, and then there's more students in middle school. So with that peer-to-peer interaction, it's just more difficult for them. Changing classes is a huge one for the Asperger's child, which is the main one I want to focus on this slide. If you think of all the tasks that are involved in changing classes, you have to gather all the things that you have at your desk, find your locker, remember the combination to unlock your locker, find the stuff inside your locker that you need to get out, put the stuff back in your locker that you don't need for the next class, find the next class, get out what you need for the next class, adjust to the new teacher's expectations, and adjust to the new teacher's content. That's 9 things that they're supposed to do in a space of about 4 minutes. And especially adjusting to the new teacher's content and the new teacher's expectations is hard because the Asperger's child does not have the ability to make that mental shift. and expectations and content. And so while they're in math class, they could still be thinking about reading class, which was 2 periods before. And so they can't make that mental shift with their content. And so with their homework assignments, if they don't get their homework assignment done while they're thinking about a certain subject, they have trouble going back and making that mental shift to get it done later. And again, there's the organization thing, they can't stay organized, and so. How to help? Implications for teachers otherwise. Develop organized procedures. This doesn't mean that you need to run your lesson the exact same way every day. But if you have an assignment tray by the door, if you have a schedule up on the board of what you're going to be doing every day, the Asperger's child will be more likely to adjust to your classroom. Assist with transitions. Most students only get orientations and tours of the school. So the Asperger's child will need a little bit more support. In my classroom, I would probably meet up with the Asperger's child, take them on an individual school tour so that they can see where they'll be going exactly. Adjust homework assignments. A lot of the Asperger's children you'll find will go, homework assignments are designed to go from point A to point B. A lot of the Asperger's children will go from point A to point Z because they can't focus on a certain topic for very long. So your job as a teacher is to figure out how to get them from point Z back to point B with the same learning outcome as the rest of the students. And so you need to figure out a way to use their interest area in the direction that they're headed to your advantage. Teach organization. If you teach them how to use folders and planners and things like that, then you'll be able to get more homework assignments completed. I know I'm going to have folders and things like that provided for my Asperger's students because I know how difficult it is for my fiance to keep all of his papers organized. Assistive technology. Computers help with this. It takes out the social element so they can just focus on the computer whenever they need tutoring or help with learning new content. There's also a software called MindReader that has a picture of a person's face with an expression, say they're frowning, and then you could have 4 choices: happy, sad, angry, frustrated, and then the child would have to choose which choice the facial expression is expressing, which feeling, and so that'll help them learn social cues a little bit more. Mainstreaming, we all have heard about mainstreaming. Usually it's beneficial to the Asperger's child because it helps them interact with their peers. And the last thing I want to talk about is the SOTA strategy. Pretty much that's what my research article I did, my article review was on. It's an intervention strategy that's designed to help those with Asperger's syndrome interpret.
And what I did is I kind of did like a little overview of child abuse and then I went into teen abuse. Nope.
It's just working.
I don't know.
Try hitting it again,
Can you
Brittany.
just push like the space bar?
For the air. I can't find my mouse.
I think the clear screen. Shake that thing. Wow.
Yeah.
Free?
Can you exit out of it and then?
Drug use, it has a lot of different behaviors that can come out of using it. And just first, I read research that said in the past, the drug problems were more with marijuana, but now it's more with prescription drugs because the students can get them easier from like their parents' medicine cabinet. Teachers notice behavioral signs of drug use usually more than parents do just because they're around them more throughout the day and like 5 days a week. And after school, I mean, they might not come directly home, they might have an after school event. One major sign that teachers often notice is a student being high, which can affect all the students in the classroom. There's also personality changes, and they can go from being really happy or in a good mood to being really negative, and which affects all the students in the classroom because it affects everyone being able to pay attention. There's also anger problems, and I found that anger problems in the 6th grade is like a doorway to using drugs in 7th grade. So if they have a lot of anger problems in 6th grade, they're most likely to start using drugs in 7th grade. Academic performance is also affected. Not going to school or skipping because of some of the side effects may cause them not to be able to go to school, or they just don't want to go. Forgetfulness to do like homework or even going to school sometimes can be an effect of using drugs. Also, a survey said that with their grades, that 72.2% who did not use marijuana had A or B averages, and 44.9% of students used marijuana within at least 5 days of the month that this survey was taken, and they had 44.9% A or B average. So you can tell that more students who didn't use drugs had a higher A and B average. And then all students are affected because the teacher has to spend more time teaching those students who are not paying attention or using drugs, who don't come to school, and they're spending more time reviewing and trying to get those students to understand the lessons too.
Can you tell us what that survey is?
It was the National Survey of Drug Use and Health. Okay, and also when students use drugs, they make poor decisions. There was an article on Rural Tennessee. Many use drugs while omitting having sexual activity, so that was like an increase. Or if they didn't use drugs, they were less likely to have sexual activity, but if they did, it was higher. An increase in drugs is equal to increase in the number of sexual partners. So the more drugs they took, like, I don't know how to explain this, like, if they took drugs for like a week, then they were more likely to have like 4 partners, and if they like used drugs for like 2 weeks, they were most likely to like have like 5 partners. It kind of like increased as the drugs increased. And this was most likely with females and IV drug use. And in the United States, every year there's about 750,000 teen pregnancies, and 80% of those are unplanned, and a lot of those have drug or alcohol use involved. And in the United States, there's $9 billion per year spent on teen pregnancies. Family structure also has an impact on drug use. There was a study in South Carolina that said that more Caucasians than African Americans live with 2 biological parents, and of those, of the African Americans are less likely to use drugs after going through divorce. So because they are less stressed after the divorce, like before the divorce, if their parents are like fighting a lot, they'll be a lot stressed. But after that, they're not as stressed anymore, so they're less likely to use drugs. Whereas Caucasians, it said that after going through the divorce, they're more stressed because they don't live in the same household. They might go to their dad's one weekend and their mom's the other, so it puts more stress on them, so they're more likely to use drugs. African Americans are more likely to use drugs when living with relatives besides parents, and overall, the study said that Caucasian females were most likely to use drugs. Implications for teachers, I said be aware and watch for the signs of drug use. You can create advisory lessons, lesson plans discussing the dangers of using drugs, and remember that students may not have a supportive family, so teachers need to be a positive role model for the students. And to apply to my classroom, I just said discuss the importance of not using drugs and encourage students to participate in after-school activities so they're not going home and getting into using drugs. Plan advisory units to discuss drugs, and get parents involved more to help.
I did mine on alcohol use, and what the problem is that alcohol use is one of the most frequently used drugs among adolescents, and there's been an estimated of 75,000 or more total alcohol-related deaths among young adults and among adolescents, and the numbers just keep growing, and kids are using them at younger and younger ages. And as we all know that there's many consequences to alcohol use, but with the adolescent child, they don't really think about that as much. They kind of think that they're invisible, so they don't realize all the consequences that alcohol has, and they don't really know their limits, so they're binge drinking, and it's just when you use it during childhood or early adolescence, it's associated with future alcohol dependence, motor vehicle crashes, risky sexual behavior, suicide, aggressive and violent behavior, and then, like I said before, alcohol-related deaths. And adolescents, they don't really like put their, I don't know how to say this, they don't really think like, oh, okay, if I have a couple drinks and end up really intoxicated and perform in risky sexual behavior, they don't really think like, okay, I could get pregnant or I could get an STD. They don't really realize that these consequences result in like lifelong consequences, which is a problem and probably why the numbers are so high. The reason why kids do it, there's many reasons that I just read over. The ones that I thought were most important were like the parents, especially with like alcoholism. That has to do with genetics and runs in families. So if your parents are alcoholics, then they have a higher risk factor of becoming an alcoholic. And if your parents drink, you're more likely to drink. Their peers, if you're hanging out with the wrong group of kids, if your group of friends drink, then you're most likely going to drink. And it's also, I found in an article that their personality, if they have like a disruptive, hyperactive, aggressive, they are usually depressed or withdrawn or anxious, then they're more likely to drink. And just the like environment around them. My article that I used for my article review, it was about alcohol advertisements and how that those can have an effect on the adolescents. Implications for teachers. A lot of the articles that I read said to incorporate prevention programs, and a lot of them said that they really do work if you use them the right way. They must include developmentally appropriate information about alcohol and drugs, a broad-based skills training. You should include goal setting and stress management. That's another reason a lot of kids drink. Maybe they're just stressed, they have a lot to deal with, they don't really know how to cope with it, so they just drink alcohol. Stress management or communication skills, general social skills, and assertiveness skills. And it's just, you can't really just incorporate a prevention program just one time a year. You need to do it over multiple sessions and over several years, otherwise it's not really going to be that effective. So this is going to really apply in the classroom. Like I said, the numbers are just getting higher and higher, and more kids are drinking, so we're obviously going to be around kids that are consuming alcohol, so we need to learn how to familiarize ourselves with this problem and get to know our students so that we know like what type of prevention programs to incorporate specifically in the program.
Wait. Oh, nope, she's ready.
Ready? I did mine on adolescents struggle with depression. And this is a scenario I saw that I really thought was shocking. 7th grade Maria sits silently at her desk while her science teacher leads an enthusiastic discussion on the extinction of dinosaurs. Maria is preoccupied with darker thoughts than the demise of the largest animal that ever roamed the earth. The 13-year-old is thinking about killing herself. I know that this isn't exactly teen depression, but because of teen depression, suicide has become the 3rd leading cause of deaths among adolescents today. So I kind of felt like if depression's not recognized and treated, then the kids can try to commit suicide and some actually succeed. So adolescent depression is unfortunately increasing. 1 out of 11 middle school students will suffer. So if you have an average of 22 kids in your class, there'll be 2 kids who have major depression. 10 to 19% of these students have symptoms, and it's twice as likely in females than males. And it's sometimes hard to tell because the characteristics in males and females are going to differ, like the symptoms they're having. And adolescents are more likely to become depressed because it is a transitional stage for them. They're developing and they're going to a new school and trying to like figure out the relationships and stuff, so they are more likely to become depressed. So it's important to find treatments that will help. One research I looked at was antidepressants and how helpful they really are, because doctors nowadays are likely just to put
kids on antidepressants. 11 million children are prescribed antidepressants right now, and that number just completely shocked me. I was like, that is a lot of kids to be taking medicine. The UK actually removed antidepressants from the market because of the increased link of suicidal thoughts and actions that these medicines have. Instead of removing it, the US just put a black box warning on it saying that this can have this effect. Like if you ever heard the commercials, at the end they like say a quick blurb about it, but no one ever really listens to it. So it's $11.9 billion market in the US. And they say that kids should take this drug because they're depressed, probably because they're lacking serotonin in their brain. But there are absolutely no studies out there right now that measure the amount of serotonin in a brain, so it's a complete guess that that's why the child is depressed. And in one of the tests, they gave half the kids placebo pills and half the kids antidepressant medicines, and 60% of the kids that were on placebo pills said they felt better and happier. So it was just like telling them you'll be better, you'll feel happier. So antidepressants really aren't having that great of an effect, as Tiffany was saying in hers. Like, you needed to combine it with therapy. Another study was the Penn Resiliency Program, and this is a parental involvement therapy. So there was a children's group and a parent group. The control group and the PRP group both had a baseline and follow-up test. The children attended 8 90-minute sessions, and the parents attended 6 90-minute sessions where they talked about lifestyles and how they coped with situations as families. And at the beginning of the study, there was no significant difference between the two groups, but in the follow-up, it showed the kids who had therapy 2 years later were actually still benefiting from the therapy and working with their parents. And the follow-up groups were back to having symptoms or back to being depressed with the control group. Another form is exercise. There was a group that had just exercise, just antidepressants and no exercise, or exercise and Zoloft. Well, in the 6-month follow-up, the two groups that had exercise and the exercise and Zoloft, which is an antidepressant, both were less depressed. So if you combine something with exercise, it had a better effect. The kids that were just taking antidepressant pills were back to being depressed again. And so in my classroom and for future teachers, I would recommend that they pay attention. Teachers are actually the first to notice if someone is depressed because you're with them majority of the time. After school, kids will go off with their friends or go home, and parents rarely ever see their kids. And so teachers need to be attentive to what is going on. And there's too many kids that are going undetected, which is leading to suicide, and kids just being unhappy, and that's not really acceptable, so people need to pay attention to it. And also, it was found that if teachers set small goals for students, they'll be more willing to show up to class and try to meet those goals because they feel like they have something to strive for. So I feel like in my classroom, I'll try to set goals for students so they feel more involved with the work.
Yeah, no, congratulations. It is in order.
So I like pan over the.
Yeah.
Okay, we're ready.
All right. My topic was obsessive compulsive disorder, or OCD, as many of you want to call it. As far as identifying the problem, just a basic definition of is a mental disorder characterized by intrusive thoughts that produce anxiety, by repetitious or repetitive behaviors aimed at reducing anxiety, or by combinations of such thoughts, which are obsessions, and then the behaviors are the compulsions. So many times people get that confused. They assume that obsessions and compulsions they're interchangeable. Obsessions are intrusive thoughts where you think about it over and over and over again, and the compulsions are actually acting upon those thoughts. It generally develops in early adolescence between the ages of 10 and 15. So, this is the age group that we're going to be dealing with as middle schoolers. And it severely impacts their everyday life, including school, work, and how they interact with others. All right, the research section is what I revised, but I've got a little note, so always ready to talk about it. Prevalence, originally they said, the research said that there's only 1% of students that have bipolar or obsessive compulsive disorder in the schools. And this is with the early research. But it's coming to find out that it's actually grown to 4% of students, which is still a small number, but it's something that you're going to have to interact with. One of the biggest things that they talked about is how OCD is really hard to diagnose because you're dealing with an early age where their emotions are going to be changing up and down, so they can't really pinpoint is what they're doing an actual obsession or compulsion, or is it just how they grow and change as these adolescents. Also, the OCD can change within the student over time, as the research said, that it can focus on their emotions and how they change. So that's why it's kind of hard to diagnose, and that's why it's becoming more prevalent, because they're taking a wider variety of students and looking at their behaviors. Also, multiple issues. One of the biggest things that it said is that if a student experiences OCD, they're more likely to experience anxiety or alcohol abuse, drug abuse, or they could also develop an eating disorder. So OCD generally leads to something else. There's a clip that I'm going to show you here in a second that it also led to depression within the certain individual. All right. As far as the research also says that about 4 out of the 5 sources, like journal-wise, that talked about treatment, they said that cognitive behavioral approach was the best, and that what they did was, it's called ERP, or exposure response prevention. So what they would do is that they would expose the person that has OCD with what triggers it. So the girl in the example that we're getting ready to show, she feels that the other people around her are contaminated.
Wow.
She can't go to the school. She has to, or the kids at school, she has trouble walking into the school. She has trouble going to the stores that she knows kids in her class have been. They're contaminated. She'll drive an hour and a half to go to stores that these kids have not been into. Another example is, so you see where from me and Dr. Pearson are standing? That's how far she has to have her mother away from her. And that's her mom. And if her mom, because she's sitting on the edge of the couch, and she cannot move from the couch, and then the mom is sitting on a chair over there. If the mom were to get up and get to where about me and Mike are, she'll freak out. She cannot have her, and that's her mother. That's someone that, raised her, is with her, but she is so contaminated that she cannot have her in there. She literally, she freaked out. So what these prevention does is that it slowly, over a period of time, exposes them to the things that they're obsessed with, or the compulsions that they do, and try to lessen the experience, because if you repeatedly experience this, their thoughts are that your mind, it'll lessen. It doesn't always work, but it takes long periods of time. And a lot of people want to say that, with the anxiety disorders, because that's what OCD is. It's one of the anxiety disorders. It goes under, that it's easier to give them medicine. To give them, a prescription medicine that will, like an antidepressant, that will calm them down. But all the research said if you give them medication alone, it will not solve the problem. Mm-hmm. So you have to give them the therapy, and then you can add on the medication. But if you add it together, that's what works best. But they would prefer, especially at a young age, to start them with the therapy first, and then transition into the medication later. Because if they have OCD, they're probably going to have it the rest of their life. Mm-hmm. So it's, you don't want them to get so dependent on these drugs per se. And that's just how the research said it, and it draws off of my own personal opinion. I really feel that we probably shouldn't be medicating our youth. Mm-hmm. But, that's, like I said, my own personal opinion. Okay? Show you. here's the one. So what do I do if you're supposed to upload it? Just don't do it?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, this is the same thing we had to do the other
Looked at
night.
this last week.
They should just do this,
They
make
should
it permanent.
just already have this stuff on the
Mhm.
machine. It makes no sense. It's 5 o'clock, we still gotta do this all day long.
Hey, I'm gonna reach that 15 minutes though, right?
I think not. It's like precedent.
I'm trying.
Teachers need to know. First, I want to ask you all, what school shooting is most memorable to you that has happened in our lifetime?
Columbine.
Columbine. I figured everyone was going to say that because that is the most notable one. But in the United States alone, there have been over 250 school shootings. Not all of them get national attention because some of them are on lower scales. Some of them, the students get caught before they can clear out the entire school. So today I'm just going to continue. As you can see some pictures. I really like this one because it says how safe are our kids, and it just kind of, the pictures get like more darker as it goes. In the middle is the picture that they constantly showed after Columbine of Eric and Dylan in the cafeteria. And the one up there at the top is a actual picture of from a video camera of children running out of their class during a school shooting. What are school shootings? Pretty much that's kind of self-explanatory. It's a major event that usually happens where someone comes in and pretty much shoots up a school. But a lot of people assume only students do this, and that's not the case. For example, another major one that I'll talk about later, it was the Amish schoolhouse shooting, and that was a man who just randomly came into an Amish school, shot 5 girls. He just was having a bad day, and that's what he chose to do. So it can happen on any scale. In my paper, I talked about how they kind of categorize them in mega events, minor events, and the mega events were like Columbine, Virginia Tech. When more than 5 people have been killed, they call it a mega event, and that's how they look at them. When have school shootings occurred? And this is kind of giving you years. The earliest U.S. school shooting happened in 1966. It was at the University of Austin, Texas, at the University of Texas in Austin. And a man was on top of the tower, and he pretty much just shot randomly with a sniper pistol. The first actual high school shooting occurred in 1974. And that was in New York. And a young man just went into his high school on a Saturday, and of course, at the time they were having like Saturday school sometimes, and students were in the building, and he just was shooting people just randomly. The first one major middle school, since this is a middle school class, that middle school shooting that happened and didn't happen in our lifetime, and it kind of gets forgotten about because right after that Columbine happened, but 2 young men, they pulled the fire alarm at their school, everyone ran out, and they were in the bushes, and they just started shooting. And that was in middle school. So those are just examples of how it can happen. Why do school shootings occur? There's no single profile that describes the attackers. They come in a variety of ethnic groups, family situations, social groups, different levels at school. So for instance, how we've been talking about the bullying, they can be about just about anyone. I mean, like when you looked at the pictures of the 2 young men from Columbine, they were often showing their high school pictures where they were smiling. They look like nice kids. And that's what a lot of people assume, and they might be going through other situations. So I took this part from a website that I researched, and it was about prevention of school shootings. And a lot of researchers break them down into different personality traits. Shooters can have dark, brooding personalities. They can feel alienation. They can have a fascination with guns, which they did say that Eric and Dylan in particular, they just had a big fascination with guns. So they were really curious of how to use them, wanted to show them off to people. They sometimes repeatedly talk about violence and even committing violence. They have a preoccupation with violent entertainment. So if you have a student in your class that's like always talking about, oh, Halo, blah, 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 you know, sometimes you might want to sit aside and kind of say, you know, wait a minute, he talks about Halo like every day. This is like his life. I need to watch that. So, and then they might have, I was supposed to say snowball effect, but they might have like a big effect of troubles just coming down on them. So if you have a student that might just like be going through a divorce with their family, someone might have just passed, keep an eye on them. One thing that they did point out in my research was the Virginia Tech shooter, he wrote about it. Like, and these were papers that he submitted to his teachers. And they took them because they were just like, it's another paper. The only teacher that he had that kind of said something, the poet Nikki Giovanni, she's an English teacher at Virginia Tech, and she took a paper. It was talking about doing something violent like a massacre type shooting. She reported it. They said, well, we can't do anything unless he actually does it. So by the time it happened, it was too late. So those are a lot of the implications. What are the major shootings? I've mentioned just about all of these, and these are the pictures of the people. And like I said, with those two, this is a picture that a lot of people kept saying, that they kept showing to show that these were normal looking kids. I did read an article where to see if these were guys that were often bullied, and they were, but just as the next person. They weren't bullied any more than anyone else. They were pretty good in class, but they were just kind of to themselves and quiet. Nobody ever suspected them to come into school and just clear out. And something I want to say particular about them, it stopped at 13. They wrote out a plan to bomb the entire school, shoot just about every person, and as the bombs were going off, to have one of them outside to pick off people as they were coming out. The guy in the middle who did the Amish school shooting, the way he did that, he cleared out the boys and parents that were in the building, lined all the girls, it was 11 girls, up against the wall and just started shooting. 6 of the girls survived, but they were injured, 5 died. And with Virginia Tech, it was a 2-hour time in between. Like first he shot an RA and a girl in her dorm, and then he went to the engineering building and shot 31 more people. And between the 2-hour slot, what a lot of people didn't know, he sent pictures and videos to a lot of news outlets to let them know. They didn't take it seriously instantly until they started hearing of the shootings. So that's when they started releasing the pictures saying this is who's doing it while it was going on. And he had locked the doors so no one could get in to stop him. This cartoon, it kind of stuck out to me because I'm a social sciences concentration. And it says today's lesson, the Second Amendment, and of course it's talking about a lot of guns. And a lot of things I saw was talking about gun control and how people don't realize how much students actually realize, know there's not that much gun control, especially in certain states. For instance, a lot of things have happened down south, where unfortunately down south, a lot of states do not have that great of gun control. Mm-hmm. And students know that. The way Eric and Dylan got guns was because their grandpa would let them go hunt. So they knew where the key was to get to the gun thing and all that. That's a major thing to me because I went into a hunting store one time just because, and they had youth guns. That really bothered me. Wow. So it really bothered me. These are 2 videos. I'm going to show you this one. It's about this book, and it's by Jennifer Brown. And pretty much you'll see what it's about through the video, but I really like it.
find it kinda sad. Dreams in which I'm dying are the best I've ever had. Find it hard to tell you and I find it hard to take. People run in circles, it's a very, very
Pretty much kind of like this shows you, the book is about Valerie and Nick, and that the fact that they wrote this list of people they disliked. Valerie did not expect for Nick to go into their high school and shoot up the cafeteria using this list. And now she stopped him by jumping in front of a girl he was trying to shoot. So she kind of stopped him, and when he shot her, he turned the gun on himself. So she now has to deal with the fact that some people who don't know that how close her and Nick were think that she's a hero, but others know that they were in a relationship, and some even know about the list. So it's that toss-up going through the book of, she feels guilty because she knows she helped write the list, so she thinks it's her fault. But then again, she doesn't know if she should feel good because she did save someone's life. So I'm gonna skip this video, and this is just my sources. So if anyone has any questions.
Are you going? Okay. I did Adolescents and Promiscuity, and the main problem that my paper focused on was the high-risk behavior that adolescents partake in. The research that I found was saying how students in middle school have had multiple sex partners, meaning that 10 to 15-year-olds have already slept with 3 or more people, which is crazy. Another big risk behavior that they're doing is they're not using protection while they're going through these behaviors and acts. They're not using condoms, they're not taking precautions. And because of this, a lot of STDs and STIs are generating and spreading really fast, and also a lot of girls are getting pregnant. And the pregnancy rate had been slowly decreasing, and since 2006 it's been going up a little bit. And then another thing that I'll touch on is alcohol, dealing with these high-risk behaviors. Okay, the different types of sex are vaginal, oral, and anal. I had an article that gave definitions, and I just want to throw this out there. The article that I read was a survey that was given to students before they took the actual participation part of the survey, and it defined the 3 different kinds of sex, and they just kind of, as a 7th grader, I try to look at it as a 7th grade perspective. Oral sex was defined as putting your mouth on someone's anus, penis, or vagina, and then in parentheses it said anus. That means your butt. What 7th grader would not crack up at a definition like that? You can't take it seriously. I mean, they could have used better wording. But anyways, back to the presentation. Surprisingly, vaginal intercourse was the most common among middle school students, which just totally threw me for a loop, because I would have thought that kids at that age would not want to do that, but they do. Anyways, keep going. Alright. Factors. Socioeconomic class is one of the higher factors for whether students participate in sexual acts or not. Most students participating that were involved in all the surveys also, and that were found to have already experienced sexual behaviors, were qualifying for free and reduced lunch, which does mean that they're at the poverty level. And the students that are participating, if they do get pregnant, they are often more likely to have a child who, when they grow up, will in fact participate in the same way, and they're more likely to be sick or not finish their education and keep up with the cycle. Their kids will do it and they'll keep going. Another factor is race. One survey that I looked at, one study was all about the different races and how willing they were to participate in each different sexual act. And basically, everybody was doing everything. There wasn't too much difference. African American boys especially admitted more openly to having sex throughout the studies. However, Hispanic boys were saying that they had had it more recently than anyone else. So, kind of interesting. Gender, generally again, they're both the same. Boys and girls were doing it. And maternal influence is a factor for mainly African American girls. I did my journal article thing on this. African American girls are more influenced by their mothers, and they tend to act the same way that their mother did when she was that same age. And because of this, if their mother grew up in a nice home, wasn't promiscuous and all that, the girl tends to grow up the same way. If, however, the mother did do these things, the girl is more likely to do them also, because it was probably a good chance that the mother got pregnant at 16 or younger, like we see on TV sometimes, like Teen Mom. STDs and STIs. The main health risk among adolescents are STDs and STIs because, like I said, kids were participating in the risky behavior of not using protection. The STDs were being transmitted very rapidly throughout schools. And having STDs and STIs actually increases your likelihood of getting HIV. So that rate is also going up for adolescents and middle schoolers. And it is the 6th leading cause of death between 15 to 24-year-olds. There is a risk score that was done in one study, and I have the little pointer thingies that I'm going to tell you. If you had a partner with urethral discharge, you get 2 points. If you are less than 20 years old and are having sex, you get 1 point. If you've had more than one partner in 3 months, you get another point. And if you do not have a fixed partner and you like to sleep around, you get another point. If you have over 2 points on this scale, you are very, very high risk for STD. And actually in this study, the number of kids that had 2 or more points was like really close to 100%, but not that many people had STDs in the study. It was kind of throwing it off a little bit. And then 25% of teens will have STDs before graduating high school, which is kind of crazy if you think about it. Alcohol is used with adolescents in order to inhibit their thinking and different things. A lot of guys will give girls drinks to try to get in bed with them, stuff like that. They don't think as well when they're on alcohol, so they think, oh, it's okay if I do it, I won't remember it in the morning, which is not good. Unsafe practices are also common with alcohol use. Again, they don't use the condom, and then they have multiple sex partners, sometimes don't remember it depending on how much they have to drink. Drugs play a role in this also. And okay, female adolescents at parties. I really wanted to show you guys a clip, but I couldn't find it because the internet has blocked it, and the teacher who I saw it in their class doesn't have it anymore. It's kind of a graphic clip, so it's probably a good thing I didn't find it. But basically, there were parties that middle school, high school age students would attend, and there would be tons and tons of people at these parties, and we'd be drinking, whatever. One girl would designate herself as the sex person of the night. She would go into a bedroom, the guys would line up around the room, out the door, whatever. Hundreds of guys would have sex with this one girl in one night. She would come out, like this was like on Dateline NBC, I think. She would come out covered in semen. It would be all over her, and I just thought that was repulsive.
What class did you see this in?
I don't remember. It was like a different college.
Dr. Croy. It was in his.
Could have been.
Yeah, it was in outside of Atlanta, Georgia. I remember it.
Yeah. So anyways, yeah, this
It was
is like
outside of
10 to
Atlanta,
15-year-olds.
That's where it
doing
happened
this.
at, in an upscale,
Sometimes older,
suburban.
yeah. Ew. And
I don't know what else to say.
Anyways, acts like this obviously will result in pregnancy and STDs. Duh. Anyways, implications for teachers. I said that teachers should be well educated on the sexual behavior so that they can talk to their students if necessary. They should know what's going on, what their students are up to for the most part. Especially don't let anything happen in the school. That's really bad. Don't let that happen. Follow the school policy. If the school policy is abstinence, follow it. Leave it up to the nurse to go into any more detail if you know the students aren't being abstinent, because as a teacher you can't really say, hey, here's a condom, go use it, because they're having sex. But anyways, know how to handle sexual remarks made in classrooms by students. At that age, a lot of students will try to be funny and try to maybe be perverted, different stuff. Their humor's a little different, so they'll try to make remarks, get a rise out of the teacher and other students. Know how to handle those. And also make lessons on health and reproductive issues like sex education that you can have in the classroom that is classroom appropriate. Other faculty like nurses and counselors should, like I said, have information ready for use for the students. Pamphlets on pregnancy, abortion, I guess, I don't know. Just options for kids. Have contraceptives ready and information on them, because in a lot of the studies it said, okay, we're going to talk to students about not having sex, and ones that are, be abstinent, that's great, but what about the kids who are already acting on sex and they're not going to stop? You have to talk to them too, and you have to be ready to help them, because they're not just going to stop because their teacher's saying don't have sex, They'll probably keep going with it. And anyways, help make a plan of action for teachers depending on the severity of behaviors. Again, with the nurses and counselors, just talking to teachers, be ready with topics too, and ideas for teachers to use just in case they need them. And then bring awareness to the community and get them involved. This really does help with keeping kids abstinent. In my classroom, I would follow the school policy, obviously, and make sure students know what it is. A lot of times students don't know what the school policy is on sex. It's okay to have open discussions, so I would definitely have discussions and talk to students about their feelings on different things. But again, you can't get too into depth with students about sex because it's more of a nurse and counselor thing to do. And then again, the lessons on the different health issues. You can have nurses come in and talk to the students, or set up private meetings depending on the concerns to educate the students. And I think it's really important to have a non-discriminatory school environment where students can come and ask you questions, or can go and ask nurses and counselors, or even do peer counseling.